the first thing you're gonna do is identify the tissue first. Okay. By this alone, I cannot identify it. But there's something in here. What do you think is that? This tissue is apparently lined by, let's look closer. What kind of epithelium is that?
Simple columnar.
Simple columnar. Some have cilia. Not all, but some have cilia. And then, if you look closely, there is no what? What is the absent layer?
Submucous.
This is already muscularis right here. This is mucosa right here.
Submucous.
The submucosa. So this organ or tissue does not have submucosa and lined by this simple columnar ciliated epithelium. So what do you think is this tissue? Of course, it's the gallbladder. But if you take notice, look at these cells right there. They infiltrate much of the lamina propria, muscularis, and perhaps the serosa. I can see them also here. So there is the serosa. So there is what we call transmural involvement here. So there's the thing, chronic mononuclear infiltrate. We achieve such, right? And then actually this wall is thickened by virtue of the fact that there are cells in here. I think there's edema still in this tissue, but there is much deposition of these collagen fibers now. So it is thickened by that fact. So thick-walled gallbladder accounted for by the chronic inflammatory reaction, deposition of collagen fibers, fibrosis, right? Attempts at healing, right? So there you go, you got two. Where is the tissue destruction? If you look at the mucosa, some of them are already eroded. Yeah? Yes, there. So that's the tissue destruction right there. Apart from the fact that the wall, this wall, no longer display or no longer has that property for distension and elasticity. No? So it's sort of limited function already. So that's what we call tissue destruction. So this is actually chronic cholecystitis. Chole meaning bile, cystitis meaning bladder. Cyst meaning bladder. Itis, inflammation. So chronic cholecystitis. Majority of the cases that display this kind of histopathology is usually caused by whatever is in the lumen. So in most cases, what do you think is the cause? Common sense. What do you think? Gallstones, or just stones, or cholelithiasis in medical terms. Okay? So the stones here irritate much of the tissue beneath. Yeah? Stones form when they have a more than enough concentration to form a nidus and conglomeration among the salts that form in this bile secretion. Okay? So quite easy. Chronic cholecystitis, chronic inflammation. let's reserve that for something else. Okay. Oh, okay. These are two special types or patterns of chronic inflammation. Let's discuss that last in chronic inflammation. Now let's look at this. Okay. What do you think is the tissue? Okay. Got here your alveolus. Okay, so the alveolus is right here. Main function is to exchange gas. Normally it is very thin, almost very flimsy, and almost only composed of the capillaries that run through the walls, okay, of this. But here they are thickened because of increased deposition of collagen fibers. Now that can also cause dysfunction of the tissue. What is more is that it's got this consolidation right here. So you can no longer appreciate the air spaces. In fact, this consolidation is made up only of your smooth muscles, fibrosis, and the pigments. These brown things are pigments. Okay? And I think the brownish color elucidates a previous bleeding into this tissue. So this is hemosiderin. Okay, hemosiderin. But wait, there is more. Look at those things. Yeah? They look like, and this one looks like a cotton bud. No? Cotton buds. Sa mga Amerikano, ang tawagan na Q-tip. You know, Q-tips. They look like Q-tips. So, these Q-tips or cotton buds are actually insoluble material that is foreign to the body. And in this case, it is known as your asbestos. Okay. And let me just this is a perfect example. I cannot find it. Sorry, I cannot find that perfect example, but they look like that. Each line has a different configuration, but quite similar. Anyway, you can see the tissue destruction is there, fibrosis is there, and those cells, these are your activated macrophages, which actually phagocytose the pigment. Okay. So as you can see there, and in fact, you can see them with abnormal configuration. Some of them have larger cytoplasm, larger nuclei. Look at those things. These are indication, these features are an indication of highly activated macrophages, and persistently so. And these macrophages actually attempt to eliminate the injurious agent, which is your asbestos body. Asbestos body ang tawag dyan, ha? Okay? So, the thing is, this asbestos body is essentially larger than itself. hundred or many times over. Even if they form a giant cell, they cannot possibly phagocytose and dissolve this material. What they do is they secrete a lot of cytokines and a lot of their proteolytic enzymes to the surrounding tissue. This result in what we call a condition known as frustrated phagocytosis. Read on that. There's a term showing you or telling you about frustrated phagocytosis. Anyway, so those things can result in this configuration. Look at this cotton buds right here. It has branching. So that's your asbestos body. Okay. So that's the tissue destruction. Look at this part right here. There is a huge area involved where your air cells or air spaces are compromised. Okay. So eventually, if this person keeps exposing himself to the asbestos body, then this thing will go on and eventually involve larger portions of his lung, essentially limiting his pulmonary function. Okay, so that's your asbestosis, ang tawag, no? Now, asbestos is a foreign body, right? Now, this is an example of what we call in our pulmonary jargon as pneumoconiosis. Pneumoconiosis. Essentially meaning foreign body. So any foreign body, for example, in the lungs, can produce a similar reaction. Okay? But essentially chronic inflammation with the activation of your macrophages and showing them to ingest a lot of pigments that essentially cannot be killed unless you eliminate them by pushing them out of the body. Another example of that is this. Slide 143.
Sana naman?
Look at that. Do you say that you can see pulmonary tissue in there? No. Yeah. I can see an airway and the chronic inflammatory infiltrate. But these pigmented things are your macrophages. Those things, macrophages, yan. And you can see these spindle-shaped cells. These are your fibroblasts. Okay, fibroblasts. Actively secreting the collagen fibers. Depositing the fibrotic tissue all the time. And look at these cells. So these cells also remain intensely activated. Why? Because they try to eliminate something which they cannot. Okay? Ang nasa libro, actually is silicosis. 143. Yeah? Am I right? No, in our manual. What I mean by libro is the manual. No, the title of this slide is silicosis. But one cannot see the silicon particles. What you can see here is actually the one that comes along with the silicon mining, which is carbon. carbon particles. So carbon particles, when they actually come in pigments like this is known as anthracotic pigment. So anthracosis. In most cases, silicosis and anthracosis come together because the miners use a lot of these pollutants. We inhale a lot of these pollutants as they mine the silicon. But there are other, I think it's not present here. There are other histologic features that can tell you silicosis. Okay? Like a large particle that surrounded by fibrosis and inflammatory cells. So 3 basic features: chronic inflammatory infiltrate or mononuclear infiltrate, attempts at healing, fibrosis, and tissue destruction. All have been fulfilled by this. But this is a non-specific reaction, okay? So this is just chronic inflammation. However, there are some instances when you can see a specific reaction. Let me see, what is this? This is another non-specific, by the way, but this one actually is due to mostly or predominantly infiltrates with lymphocytic cells. So let's identify the tissue first. What is the tissue? What is the tissue? I can see some cyanide. Yeah, parotid gland. Very good, no? Why do you say parotid and not sublingual? Because the glands cyanide are purely serous. Serous. So wala kang yung mucoid type, no? These are your ducts right here. Now, this is the secretory portion. Yeah? This is the ductal portion of the gland. However, here, there's something going on. Look at that. So this is actually a lobular structure. So it's got one lobe right here, another lobe right here. But this tiny lobe right here is replaced primarily by your lymphocytic cells. So if you look at the close lymph infiltrate, no more saliva being produced, especially if there is this periductal infiltrate. Eventually this will close up and zero saliva. I'd like to see you talk without saliva. I'd like to see you talk with a dry mouth, extremely dry mouth. Can you do it? It can also involve other secretory glands like your lacrimal gland. So dry eyes na rin. Dry throat, dry everything. And you've got dry eyes, metaplasia ang imong cornea or the sclera, no? Anyway, that's just part of the syndrome. So this one displays the prominent lymphoid infiltrate within the lobules of your parotid salivary gland. This almost completely replaced by the lymphoid infiltrate. So that's extensive tissue destruction right there. Okay? That you call this as chronic Sial adenitis. Sial meaning salivary. Adeno meaning gland. And then itis, inflammation, salivary gland inflammation. And in this case, that salivary gland is parotid gland. You can technically say parotiditis. Now let's look at specific patterns. There's only one specific pattern. They can result from either a specific mechanism. You know, we have the foreign body type, and the other is the immunogenic type. Okay, so what specific pattern is that?
Granuloma.
It's the granuloma. Granuloma. So chronic inflammation can manifest as a chronic granulomatous type. We have two types. I think I can show you one that is due to an autoimmune or some sort of a complex mechanism, idiopathic. So pag hindi mo alam ang explanation sa disease, sabihin mo idiopathic para hindi ka halatang walang alam. So actually, you can see here numerous collections of these consolidates, microconsolidates. Now, these microconsolidates, I call this as granuloma. So mga granuloma sa mga yan. Now, each granuloma is made up primarily of lymphoid infiltrate. Some of these larger cells which have sort of the spindle-shaped configuration, you call them as macrophages. Yan, mga macrophages na mga yan. Ganyan, ganyan, ganyan. And I suppose there are also smaller ones, like this, with blunt ends. These actually are your fibroblasts, which secrete a little bit of your collagen fibers that form part of your granuloma. Now, sometimes these macrophages will join forces to form larger cells, and you call them as your giant cells. Okay, so pag ganyan, so I can actually show you a little bit of those giant cells right here. Look at that. These are your giant cells. Medyo hindi klaro yung cytoplasmic border niya. Medyo weird. So you can see that there are numerous nuclei within this one big cell. I suppose that's another big cell right there. Another big cell right here. Okay. So this, together with this lymphoid infiltrate around and some fibrosis, and they are confined within an area like so, well-circumscribed area. Okay, so that's a granuloma there for you. But the thing with this thing, this is known as your sarcoidosis. Actually, technically, it can involve any part of your body, but it most commonly involve the anong tissue yan?
Lungs.
Yes, the lungs. Can you see how thin a normal lung is? A normal alveolus is? Yes? And you see the thickness of the other alveoli in pneumoconiosis, for example. Yeah? So as you can see here, there's a giant cell right here. There's a lymphoid infiltrate right there. And some of the macrophages, like so. Others are not involved, but eventually, if it becomes more extensive, it's going to involve everything, including the entire lobule of the pulmonary tissue. So, another example right here. So, the thing is, this does not have any necrosis going on in it. So, tawag dito non-cacheating type. Because technically, in a granuloma, you wall off anything that is causing the reaction, right? And that walling off actually closes the oxygen supply as well. So it produces a necrotic tissue within. And that necrotic tissue, when you cut it off and try to touch it and try to manipulate it, it feels like cheese. That's why it's called caseous necrosis. This one doesn't have it. Okay, you get this? Sarcoidosis. Oh, another giant cell. Yeah? Another lymphoid infiltrate, another granuloma. Okay? So, pretty easy to identify, really. So that's a form of, or a pattern of chronic inflammation. Unlike in acute inflammation, there are basically 4 patterns, right? Can you remember some of them? Serous, fibrinous, purulent, ulceration or ulcer. Okay? This one has only 1. Actually, technically 2, non-specific and granulomatous type. If you are into the classifying thing, okay, if you categorize and organize your thoughts into that kind of thing. So, ganito lang siya. The other one, which is also known as a granuloma, but it has caseous necrosis within it. This is it. Very classical, no? Yan. Numerous. And medyo extensive siya, no? Extensive. So this is one granuloma right here, another one right here, another one right here. Occurring at different levels pa. So pag-cut mo, some parts are just portions of that granuloma, but some are actually cut through their center when you can see this and this. This one has a very large caseous necrosis right there. It's a caseous necrosis right there. Now if you look at the wall, let me just see if I can find a very good one here. This one. This one. Let's look at it. Okay, so this is the middle part, caseous necrosis, followed by these spindle-shaped cells, which are which have the larger nucleus. You call them as your epithelioid macrophages. So these cells are pathognomonic of this kind of reaction. And also, you've got these tinier ones, which are your fibroblasts. And at the periphery, you can see a collar of lymphoid infiltrate. So lymphoid infiltrate. And if you notice this huge cell right here, this one is known as your Langhans type giant cell. with the nucleus located at the periphery. Sometimes it may have the similar configuration of a horseshoe pattern. So, yan ang Langhans type giant cell. Essentially quite very, very indicative of tuberculosis. Mycobacterium tuberculosis infection. So, yeah. If you see a caseous necrosis right here, sometimes this caseous necrosis erodes on a larger blood vessel and bleeds into that. And sometimes patients cough out blood because of that. Before, it was known as, tawag ito sa olden times was consumption. And once you cough out blood, tigok na ka. Kung naki-treatment, patay na yung ka. Soon enough. No? TB sa una. No? So, because of this, no? Do you see any functional tissue here? No more. Actually, the granuloma formation is very extensive, so I cannot see any part apart from this pleura perhaps. This is the pleura. But this one, I would not tell if it is pulmonary or otherwise. Yeah? So I can see a lot of these Langhans type giant cells right here. So let's look at that. Yeah, peripherally located nuclei, sometimes with a horseshoe pattern. There's fibrosis. There's your epithelioid macrophages and a collar of lymphoid infiltrate. Okay. So, pag may caseous necrosis yan, I can still appreciate the remnants of alveolus right here. But this alveoli have extensive edema, fluid in them, and the macrophages. These are not epithelioid macrophages. It's your regular macrophages. But if you look the ones in the granuloma, you can see that they are more of a spindle-shaped type. No? Parang yung upper layers ng certified squamous epithelium. That's why they're called epithelioid. No? That's why they're called epithelioid. So this is just parang yan. Yan na lang ang remnants ng pulmonary tissue. Okay? This one has caseous necrosis in the midst. So numerous granulomas all throughout. Okay, so this one is the caseating type of granuloma. Now we're done with chronic inflammation. So I want you to read about the role of each of the cells in chronic inflammatory response. And read about them. Like for example, the influence of your lymphocytes, macrophages. Sometimes there are instances where one is the key cell that drives the entire reaction. Okay? Remember that there are two types of macrophages according to their activation. What are those? The M1 and the M2. M1 is classically activated and the M2 is alternatively activated. Which one is the killing macrophage? M1.
M2.
And the M2 is the repair or healing macrophage. It's not a killing, but a healing. Now let's look at, when we talk about healing, let's look at the healing thing. So we've got slides that essentially show you the healing process. This one, this is, I think, a scar tissue, slide number 88. Okay. So this is just part of a scar tissue. I did not even know where it came from because I could not find any indication that it came from somewhere. It's just a scar tissue perhaps, no? I could not even see epithelium in there. Parang scar tissue lang talaga ang ginawa. No? Now, if you look at the scar tissue itself, what do you see? Thick bundles of collagen fibers. Those are your fibroblasts. And there's still a remnant of the chronic inflammatory response going on because I can see a lot of them here. Mononuclear infiltrate. These are lymphoid, and sometimes you can appreciate macrophages in there. It's mostly scar tissue and no longer chronic inflammatory response. So when you see this, just say scar tissue. I cannot see even what part of the body this is. Next one is, what do you see that? What do you think that tissue is? Do you notice whenever I view a certain slide? This is actually, as you can see, this part right here, well demarcated, right? And you can see paler area. Pale, pink, pale, pink, pale, pink. But you can see a remnant of, parang isa lang yan sila, and then naging pale siya, o pabigla-bigla. And then, this is actually the necrotic part, the one that undergo the infarct itself. But what do you notice here? Let's look at the reaction itself. So yan. Let's look at it. So here, you can see what? Well, I can see some red blood cells. So there must be some hemorrhage going on in here, right? And then there's, what do you call these tiny blood vessels? Capillaries, or even these larger blood vessels. So capillary caliber vascular channels, which I think are the beginnings of a new vascular channel system forming here. And this is essentially known as angiogenesis. So technically, I can see angiogenesis here. Also, there is this blobs of clear material right there, which may indicate pockets of, are you okay? Huh? Siguro naka-irritate siya ang throat. Okay. So these pockets of things here, pockets of fluid. So I think there's still edema going on in here. And the hemorrhage that goes through this is actually a product of the newly formed blood vessels, which appear to be leaky. When you say leaky, things leak out of its contents, of its lumen. And even cellular contents leak out, including red blood cells. That's what accounts for the hemorrhagic thing going on. So technically, you can say this is a granulation tissue right here. But in the slide, it's known as organizing myocardial infarct. Okay? So you can no longer see actually necrosis here. but the granulation tissue of that necrosis. Okay? Yeah?
Yes.
So granulation tissue, there's so much I would like to ask about granulation tissue. And essentially, it shows here the vascular channels, the fibroblastic cells, the edema fluid. That's all you can see in a granulation tissue. Yes? And this is non-functional already. It doesn't contain the myofibrils within the cells in there, or the components of our granulation tissue. Okay? So essentially the strength of this tissue grows over time. So the younger it is, the weaker it is. So the walls, yeah, can rupture anytime. So this part right here, if you expose it to high pressure, like uncontrolled hypertension, this part right there can pop out like a balloon. Strong enough, can rupture. What about this? This is two tissues. One right here and the other right here. So I think this one is wound healing. Yeah? And there is, what do you call this? Reconstruction of the skin on top. The continuum is restored right there. So essentially the epithelium has renewed itself, and I think the original wound was somewhere here. But I think the wound healed by primary intention because there's not much damage, and there is reconstitution or restoration of the original epithelium right there. This is called re-epithelialization. And if it does, it's going to leave very minimal scar. Okay? So that's why surgeons, particularly of the aesthetic kind, cut with very sharp tools with very clean environment. Because in that scenario, wounds tend to heal with minimal scarring. Because it heals uninterrupted, smoothly. No? So from acute to chronic and healing. All stages, no infection, no whatsoever, no scar almost. But you can still see part of it here from the indentation. No? So that's the scar. However, if there's a scenario where the tissue actually does not heal very well because of interruptions like unpleasant pressures, pulling it from one side to another, or probably na-infect yung wound itself, or the wound is extensive so that the skin covering it has a very wide gap, and the re-epithelialization is delayed because of that. One way you can avoid such gap, if there's a gap, is to do skin grafting to bridge the gap and allow the re-epithelialization to happen at a more acceptable rate. However, there are also instances where there is this. Okay? There is protrusion of the scar tissue on top of a normal layer. So this protrusion is covered by the same epithelium. However, if you look beneath, you can see these thick bundles of poorly organized collagen fibers. So excessive deposition of the collagen fibers. If you want to look closer, you see that they are like so. So very thick bundles of these organized collagen fibers. So this accounts for the protrusion of this entire thing. Actually, this is more of a genetic reaction, no? Particularly in dark-skinned individuals like the African American, no? Blacks. No? So this is called the keloid. But the keloid and hypertrophic scar, microscopically, essentially the same. Their only difference is when you look at the lesion itself. If you have a wound and there's a protruding scar over it, but the scar does not go beyond the borders of the original wound, then that's a hypertrophic scar. Now it spreads beyond the borders. If it spreads beyond the borders of the original wound, then you call it as a keloid. This can either be a keloid or a hypertrophic scar. But apparently, your book says, or your manual says it's a keloid. And the other one is just a healing scar, I think. Yeah? Right there. So you read more on the molecular basis of wound healing. What are the hormones or growth factors involved in the wound healing itself? What cells do they influence in that healing tissue? And how does it happen? So this one, the color alone, you can see that it's quite different. Pag nakita niyo to, wound infarction. Technically, it's just a stage, you know, from a necrotic tissue to a scar. So, pretty easy to identify. The thing is, got a lot of questions here, like which mediator is responsible for the recruitment of vascular progenitor cells. Do you know that it is recruited in this area to form the angiogenesis process? Which one? VEGF for vascular endothelial growth factor. And how does it influence? Which receptors are involved? The ligands. Which secondary messenger system is activated?